Welcome to Local Living Tri-City, your go-to podcast for exploring the vibrant communities of Temecula, Murrieta, and Menifee. Join me, Liz Jones, as we dive into real estate insights and local business stories, bringing you closer to the heart of our Tri-City area. Let's get started with today's episode. Hey everyone, this is Liz Jones. Thanks for joining our episode of the podcast. Today with me is Jonathan Ingram, a distinguished guest who has been both mayor, sat on the city council for Murrieta, and recently has served and run for county supervisor. And I feel privileged that he's here with us today. He's a wealth of knowledge, and welcome today.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
You bet. So before we dive into all the stuff that you know about Murrieta and the surrounding areas, the county-wide, I would love to know a little bit about you personally. I got to see a little bit of a snippet of your heart over lunch one day, and I'd love to know about your family, how you came to be here in Murrieta, and what your passions are.
Like most, I'm a transplant from Los Angeles and grew up in Burbank, Glendale, Sherman Oaks. Area got crowded and felt that I needed some elbow room and some space for grandchildren and my children, so did a lot of research as a builder and a developer and found that Murrieta was an amazing place to relocate. And we decided this is where we wanted to retire. So needless to say, my wife of 40 years and I started looking at homes here, and one thing led to another, and we bought in Greer Ranch.
That's wonderful. I love Greer Ranch.
It's a great community to live in.
How many years ago was that?
15, almost 16 years now.
You know, that's actually a blink of the eye when I consider all that you've done to involve yourself in the community. You're probably one of the most forward-thinking people, and I would say you're not only bold and daring, but you're knowledgeable with backing up what you say about the community. Your actions speak very loudly about your passions, and you've been a really active and wonderful addition to our community, so thank you for taking that place.
Thank you for the privilege.
You bet. So let's talk a little bit about your, after all of this is, you've won the full gamut. You've obviously understood city government very well. You've taken a stab at understanding county development and government. Tell me more. What's next for you? What's on the horizon for you? And how do you stay involved in the community?
The intention is to stay very engaged. I have the opportunity to fly at a 30,000-foot level, being retired. I manage my investments, so that gives me an inordinate amount of time. And my wife encourages me to be out and about and doing things so that I'm not under her heels.
I love that. I love that.
And I spend a lot of time with my grandchildren. We were very fortunate that our children live locally. I have a daughter who's a therapist, another's a teacher. My son-in-law, the oldest, works for the Veterans Administration. The younger one is also a teacher. So I have a 2-year-old granddaughter, a 9-year-old going on 100. But
I've met her. Yeah, she's pretty special.
Very, very smart and very engaged in community. And so I think that if I did nothing else but volunteer and work, I would be perfectly content with that, but that's not my intention.
No, that's not. I mean,
we'll see what
you'll
God.
Do that blessed.
Yeah, we'll figure out what the Lord's got in plan for us.
Absolutely. So. Well, tell me a little bit more about maybe the last couple of months. Obviously, you said you're flying a lot lately, so you're still doing development. You've seen a lot go here, and you're very, very vocal on what's happening in a state level. I'd love to talk about that, segue into that.
I think we have so many constraints that are being passed down by our budget concerns federally. So when we look at projects, I can tell you that it was a moving target. To give you a little idea, I was mayor twice, mayor pro tem twice, council member 8 years. I sat on the Regional Conservation Authority, WRCOG, library committees, I-15 Corridor Commission, many different things. And so one of my concerns is that where are these regulations coming from and how do we fund these mandates? When I first got on council, I think you can remember that we didn't have a lot of hotels. We didn't have CarMax. We didn't have Costco. There's a cost with that, but there's also a benefit because it brings resources that are directly retained by the city.
Tax resources.
Tax resources.
And I think that's
hard for a lot of folks that are local that don't see it that way. They just see a lot of development, almost like it's a dirty word, but it is actually a very good thing, and that's why some cities have thrived. As we spend locally, that money, the tax dollar, goes back into the city, and then we can continue to reinvest in the people that live here, the homes, the developments, the government.
Well, yes, and I mean, when you look at the $8,000+ a year that I spent on property tax just on my home, my assumption was that $8,000 prior to the paradigm from the outside looking in is quite different from the inside looking out. And so my assumption was that $8,000 was going to my city, it was going to my region. That's far from the case. And if I ask the average person, how much of that money do you think is allocated back to your city? It's 6 cents on the dollar. It's 6 cents. Yes.
On every dollar.
6%. So you sit and you look and you go, how do we come up with the funding to build the infrastructure, our schools, the things that we're in need of desperately? Well, one of those means was hotels. And we're blessed to now have hot springs and multiple hotels that are in the queue. We have a thing called TOT, which is tourist occupancy tax. We get to keep 100% of that.
100%.
Right.
So that's why we want more hotels and things like that.
And amenities, of course, so when the in-laws come, that you have a place to house them. You sit and you look and you go, so what do we need to do to encourage jobs locally? Well, when you look at CarMax employs hundreds of people. You look at companies like Stryker or Amgen or any of the bigger companies that our innovation center has worked to bring here from a medical resource standpoint. It creates thousands of jobs regionally. One of the big issues that we have is the average person in our communities, whether in the Southwest region, is that we commute 2 hours a day to go to work.
Yes, it's miserable.
Right, so it creates a lot of traffic. And if you take that 2 hours a day and you multiply that times a working week, that's 40 hours a month.
Wow.
So it can be, what could you do with that 40 hours, right? How much time could you spend with your family, swimming, going to church, whatever you wanted to do, versus sitting in traffic? So if you were to do a survey and you would walk through any of these communities and you ask the vast majority of people that work at Home Depot, Lowe's, Smart & Final, do you live in the community? Very, very few do, because they just can't afford it. So we started looking at how are we going to get entry-level housing, because we seem to have, no, it's not seem, it's a fact, that we have a state mandate on these apartment buildings that you're seeing now.
Really? And tell me about that.
Well, you have what are called arena numbers, and there's an expectation that each city or municipality would meet that requirement.
Okay.
So if you have 28 incorporated cities in Riverside County, those cities all go under the governing of, should be going under the city council, the city managers, et cetera. Then you have the unincorporated areas, which fall under the county. And so we're all mandated to meet those numbers. There are substantial fines if you don't. Well, what it's done, it's put this an inordinate amount of pressure on all of our corridors. Because you notice when you're driving down the corridors, whether it's from San Bernardino County to northern San Diego County, they're filling up with apartment buildings.
Yes, they are, everywhere.
The problem is these apartment buildings aren't cheap. They're $2,700 a month for a 2-bedroom.
Wow.
And so, there is incentives to do this rather than, I believe, my personal opinion is when you own your own home, that there's pride in ownership. You have skin in the game and you care about what happens in your community, right? Not to say that, residents that rent don't, but there's a different perception for somebody when they actually own their own property.
Sure.
So we're looking at, like, one of my concerns from a federal standpoint is we need to fix our budget concerns. This can has been kicked down the road for far too long. And so what's happening now is you're going to see, because I believe it's politically motivated, is a few basis points, maybe 25, maybe 50 basis points in reduction on that interest rate, which right now is almost 8%. But the impact from that is going to be hyperinflation on property because it puts the pressure in that market space for developers to develop. I don't think it's going to cure the issue where you walk into the store and you're paying $7.99 for a dozen eggs. And everybody seems to be turning their head and going, well, inflation's under control. I think it's far from it. So as we were talking earlier, if I acquire a home and my base entry-level home is almost $800,000, I take that and I get it at 8%, unless I put $200,000 down, I'm looking at a mortgage payment of about $7,000 a month, roughly $6,800. Then I have to add the 2% on and property tax on top of that.
Makes this new.
So, which is about another $8K a year. By the time you're done, you're at $7,000 a month for a mortgage payment.
Which is unrealistic.
It makes it almost impossible to purchase your home.
From a developer standpoint, is there a solution? Like you had mentioned earlier, what we did back in the 60s, where we had smaller footprints, smaller developments, easier to build structures, similar to starter homes. Is there a solution for that? Is there anything that you've been hearing from developers to start? Is it a model they can sustain?
Well, I've worked with NARRAP, a couple of other entities within Riverside County with respect to, we need entry-level and workforce housing. We need homes that aren't necessarily 2,000 square feet, that are 1,200 square feet.
Right.
I think builders will build what demand is for there. But one of the problems that I've seen is that we seem to want to demonize the building community, the development community. And what most people don't understand, whether it's Caltrans, whether it's a municipality, whether it's the county, when you're seeing improvements, sidewalks, crosswalks, schools, infrastructure improvements, those are off-site improvements that are assessed to a developer. Developers pay for that now, development impact fees,
so it's built into the profit or loss.
Well, it's mandatory, right? So they do things like an EIR, which is, an environmental impact study. They do traffic studies and they go, you're building this is your impact, therefore this is your offsite improvement cost. The problem is they're not UNICEF, right? And we've gotten pretty far behind because we've seen a surge in population in Riverside County due to the cost of San Diego, northern San Diego County, and of course Orange County and LA. So we need to figure out how we incentivize, because remember, builders are not UNICEF.
Right.
They're looking to make a profit, right?
Make a profit.
And so if there's no margin there, then there's no margin there. So the question now becomes, how do we incentivize and create things where somebody that is working at Home Depot or my youngest daughter can afford to buy a home in the community they live in? That needs to be addressed. And I think sitting down with development, sitting down with electeds and going, this is not sustainable. You want to alleviate the 2-3 hour trips. I actually drove to San Marcos a couple of weeks ago to a meeting. And I got on in Clinton Keith, headed towards northern San Diego County. How long do you think it took me to get there?
An hour and 15 minutes.
3 hours.
Oh, for goodness sake.
I videotaped the entire ride because I was just astonished.
And it's getting worse every day.
It is. And the problem is people wonder why remote learning and everything has become so popular. It's because people have the opportunity to get online and actually go to get their classes. And if we're encouraging, because one of the things that we desperately need, especially in this region, are more doctors, more nurses. Everybody complains about traveling nurses, the cost associated with it. We need to train our workforces in our county and provide the resources for them to live here and work here. There is the key, and and I don't think it's apartment buildings or the answer to that. Right. So I think the concern I have is when I look at the billions of dollars that we're seeing in deficit, right? We look
in California.
In California, well, in our country even, but let's just stick with California. I think the reality is we went through a $97 billion surplus. We now have, the target's been moving. It started out at 70 million, went down to 60, now it's $51 billion in deficit that we have there that we need to figure out how we're going to come back with. My concern is when I look at the needs of this county and I look at the needs of our cities and the people here, is why aren't the electeds in this county? If I took that $97 billion and I divided it up amongst the 58 counties in the state of California, what is the benefit to my county? Myself as mayor of a city within that county, I know what the needs are because I'm on the ground. I hear what the people say every single day. And so we have somebody managing us 400 to 600 miles away that have decided what's in the best interest of the people of the community, and I just absolutely disagree with that.
Now, how does that get resolved? What is a solution, long-term solution, short solution?
Well, I mean, the long-term solution was they had the American Taxpayers Act, which was a protection act that they accumulated a little over 1.7 million signatures, 1.4 million qualified, and yesterday the Ninth Circuit Court removed it from the ballot because of a request of the governor. And so the first concern should be of the taxpayers is, one, you had 1.4 million people say, yes, we want to explore this. Now, if all the people don't want it and you're looking at the state and an overall vote goes through and it says it doesn't pass, then it doesn't pass. But to take it off was a clear indicator to me.
They didn't even want to.
They don't want
no,
and that they don't want transparency, because when you read, even though there may have been something that's flawed in there, that's not to say that we couldn't adjust it. But what it did say is that we want things passed with a 2/3 majority. And just to elaborate a little on that, is when you look at a measure that's passed in a city or a county, if it's passed by a simple majority, 50 plus one vote, then it goes into the general fund. But if I say I'm going to create a tax measure or something that we're implementing this to support our fire and police departments, but I want a 2/3 caveat on that. When it passes by 2/3, it can only be used for what it was intended for. It can't be put into a general fund and spent on whatever they want.
So if I could recap that for the audience, what I'm hearing is that right now there was a measure, or we were trying to put on the ballot whether or not we needed to be transparent. Our government needed to be
qualified for the ballot, just for clarification.
And then, that means in November we would have been voting on whether or not we want transparency on the tax dollar that is collected here in this state. And if we receive 2/3 of the vote, then it goes for specific requests.
Correct.
And if it gets passed by 50 plus 1%, then the governor and the team gets to spend it any which way they would like to spend it?
Right. Well, pretty much. But that's what's happened anyhow with the $97 billion. When you look at the crisis that we have with homelessness and mental illness as a prime example, we've dealt with it fairly well with the city of Murrieta, and I believe Temecula's done their share. I think the problem is the governor is not here looking at what's going on. Our assembly representative and our senator certainly are, but they're only one vote, right?
Correct.
And so the problem that we have is when you look at mental illness in our state, in our country, for that matter, it was exacerbated. When I grew up, there was a movie called One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest.
I knew that one, yeah.
And it was very emotional movie, right? And it absolutely touched a lot of people's hearts. I think there was a knee-jerk reaction to close down facilities that actually helped people, that made them, whole, that we could work with issues. Was it perfect? No. Was there abuse? Yes, undoubtedly. So the problem then became, as we closed down these healthcare facilities, what we did is we took people that weren't criminals, that were mentally ill, and we incarcerated them. And what we did is we incarcerated them with individuals that were criminals. And the byproduct of that, the end result is now I have mentally ill criminals. Well, when Proposition 47 became implemented, all these people were being released into society with no means, no resource, nothing to help. And so it became very difficult to manage for our sheriffs, for our local police departments, for our fire departments, from a resource standpoint. And you can see when you go to an emergency room and you're there 6 hours, because it's just inundated. And a lot of times people are going in there to get a bed, to get a shower,
I've heard that.
And they're self-medicating.
For 2 weeks.
But yes, and so now it's become a super big issue. Why weren't those resources, when we look at the billions of dollars that were spent out of this $97 billion, why weren't those resources allocated to my sheriff, to my police chief, to my fire departments locally, and go, here's where we can utilize those resources better to have a better impact on our communities. So it's really an issue that it's only manifesting. It's getting worse. and it's getting harder and harder to control. And you can throw an awful lot of money at something
Right.
and still not fix the problem, right?
Yes. Now, that brings me back to Murrieta, where you did sit as mayor. So Murrieta in particular has Measure T. Would you explain Measure T and how it has served the community?
Absolutely. Measure T was something that I said, when we originally put it on the ballot, I'm not a fan or an advocate of taxes.
Nobody is, right?
But when we look at certain things that we see, law enforcement is essential. Fire and emergency rescue are essential. And that money was specifically earmarked for those departments. And I'm proud to say, we're in the top 3 of the safest cities in the country.
Why having our own fire police.
Yeah, and we've had stellar leadership. Our response times are very good. I think that we need more money because of the impacts of having conservation, which I'm an advocate for having places to ride bicycles and hike and everything else. I want them because I kind of escaped the region I grew up in because they
there was
didn't.
No parks, right?
And so the problem is now is we have all of these fire hazards, and we have these areas where the state and the federal government aren't maintaining them, and it puts that undue pressure on our other departments, right? And I think that we need to be going, if we're going to conserve 1.5 million acres, we need to allocate the funds for the management of that acreage. We also need to compensate the people that own the acreage when we're trying to acquire sell criteria.
Sure.
That's a whole other thing that we could discuss at another podcast. But I think that we really need to take a look at what's impacting our communities.
Sure.
And some counties are going to be much smaller. Riverside is a large county, it's got 2.5 million people in it, and it's growing annually. So that puts more and more strain on the resources that we're already weak at, whether it be infrastructure, we need high-paying quality jobs.
Sure.
We don't just need jobs where people are competing, because I'm seeing more 40 and 50-year-olds competing for a job at McDonald's.
Absolutely.
As I told you earlier, everybody's saying $20 an hour is a high wage. By today's standards, $20 an hour is $800 a week, less, 1/3 in taxes, 28% in taxes, leaves you about $600 a week multiplied times 4, that's $2,400 a month.
Yeah.
You're in real estate, what's the average cost on a 2-bedroom apartment?
Right, on the apartment,
$2,700. So I think you're falling short just a few $100s, unless math has changed. So it's changed the dynamic on how we live, and we're seeing more and more people stay home longer. Love my kids and my grandkids, but I like having my cup of coffee and talking to my wife in the morning. It's kind of liberating after 35 years.
Absolutely.
Right? So I think we need to figure out how we're going to facilitate having a home to be purchased. And not to say that this younger generation, once they acquire the home, that they don't move up into a bigger domicile.
But that's normal for all of us.
As it should be. It's a starter home, right?
Correct.
It's an entry-level home. And we need to put a lot of focus back on that immediately, because I think that's going to encourage. When you look at one of my goals with Costco, with Trader Joe's, everybody thinks, well, you got a Trader Joe's here. That's a culmination of 20 years worth of work.
Was it really?
Absolutely. Way before I was even here. Clinton Keith, I get a lot of credit for Clinton Keith, and I'm very proud of my role in Clinton Keith, but that's another 15-year, 16-year project. Many council members had touched that, right? So the projects are taking exponentially longer. When you look at French Valley Flyover, we're only doing one phase.
I know.
So that's impacting the northbound 215.
Right.
Nobody talks about the issue on the southbound side, right?
Correct.
But what it does is it causes peripheral issues, because now you're dealing with the traffic on Murrieta Hot Springs. You're dealing with the traffic on Clinton Keith, on Winchester, where everybody's trying to get into those corridors.
Yes.
Those corridors were conceived in French Valley, Winchester, and other areas to be a little more affordable with the housing. But even when you look at French Valley and you look at those areas now, they're still $600,000-$700,000.
Wow.
So that's a really big problem that we have.
So traffic, let's touch a little bit on that, because we were talking earlier about maintenance costs and what we cover. So when it comes to the freeway, that's Caltrans, right?
That is Caltrans.
So on and off ramps, that may affect both Caltrans and the city?
Yes.
So there's a contribution that the city makes after they've applied with Caltrans, and Caltrans will come in, and then you guys decide whether or not you're doing a flyover, an expansion, whatever, to funnel out some of that traffic. Obviously, it's still on the freeway, and nothing is going to be expanded on the freeway until Caltrans determines it needs to, right?
Yes, that's it. You're talking about the engineering and environmental process.
Oh,
I call it
lovely.
the bureaucratic roadblock. But
Yeah.
So all of our major circulation elements have already pretty much been established. So when you look at when I first got on council, what we looked at were the overpasses on Los Alamos, Clinton Keith. I worked with Mayor Mann and Mayor White on Scott Road and other areas in Menifee, which exponentially changed the life of people. And it also brought a safety factor that most don't know. When you look at our valley, especially the southwest region, if I have fire resources on the west of town that I need to get to the east and I don't have the infrastructure, I can't get it there. Prior to Clinton Keith being completed, if we had a fire that was in the Los Alamos region, my first day as mayor, we had the Los Alamos Hills fire. And we were driving all the way around the entire community, up Hot Springs to Winchester, come back down and around to get in there so our fire department could get there. Substantially changed the response time on what was needed, not to speak if somebody had a cardiac incident or a vehicle accident and they couldn't get to it from the Whitewood side. So one of the things that I give prior councils a lot of credit for was we took into consideration what happens during an earthquake. And if we lose that infrastructure on this side, do we have resources on that side? And so that impacts our fire ratings. It's an ISO rating. We all know when we're talking about mortgage payment and property tax, I didn't actually throw the fly in the ointment here, but my fire insurance in Greer Ranch is costing me $8,000 a year.
I'm 65 right now.
Yeah, get where I'm going. And you just go, that's certainly not sustainable. It's certainly going to encourage people. I know of an incident directly where we had an individual who's employed with a very well-paying job. It wasn't that he couldn't afford his insurance. They actually canceled his policy. And a week after the policy expired, they had a fire and his home burned down. And so there was no insurance with a family of 6 people. So I'm absolutely concerned about that. It is not prudent for individuals that are retired or people like me that moved out here to retire. The average person makes about $1,500 a month in Social Security. And if I just did a CPI of 3% a year, and I multiply that times 10, unless new math has changed it, that means 1/3 of your disposable income is gone after 10 years.
Wow.
If you're making $1,500 a month and I get 1/3 that's gone because of inflation, now you're living off $1,000 a month.
Wow.
That is not sustainable. It's just not, because now you're having people make decisions on whether they want their medication, they're going to feed their cat,
Exactly.
or pay their insurance.
And that's the most difficult thing. I think that I see also day in, day out, I'm approaching people that are in retirement years. And we might very well be forcing people to leave the area based on a lot of factors.
But the problem is, I think at some point people need to come to the realization that you can't run from it. And when you look at how we revolted during the revolution, it was over tax, and it was a very small amount on a T-tax.
Yes.
But there was principle behind it. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't pay taxes. What I'm saying is we need to take a look. If somebody has moved into a domicile that's a veteran,
Right.
that's a retiree, do we look and go, did they sell a home that they built or lived in for 30 years for $3 million?
Right.
Yes. But what did they pay for it? My dad's
Right.
first home was $34,000. So should that tax base gone up? Yeah, but the tax base did go up with Howard Jarvis. The whole premise behind Prop 13 was that seniors weren't taxed out of the homes that they spent their lifetime
Correct.
building, right? And so what you're seeing now are reverse mortgages, other things where people are supplementing their income to come in and to be able to stay in the communities.
Just to stay in their homes.
Which is just obscene. I
It's
find it
painful.
obnoxious. It is painful, and it's heartbreaking to see, but you're seeing more and more of it. And as you see our food banks that I'm very engaged with and other things, we started out with, maybe 30, 40,000 pounds of food a quarter. I know food banks that are doing 3, 4 8 million pounds a year that are feeding 500 people a week. And these are people that live in community. We're not just talking somebody that's coming out and wants a free meal.
Right.
So you're going, that's a big problem. When people are going in to get their health insurance, unless you have an advocate by today's standards with Medicare, you get Part A, Part B, Part C. If you don't buy Part B, you're going to be penalized.
I've heard that too.
And you're just sitting there going, this is not fair. We've got to get a clear, transparent process. We need to afford opportunity for everyone to come in and have a process explained to them and say, this is what benefits you best.
Yes.
So again, one of the things that we need to address when I was talking about the fire in the open space, that is a direct impact on your fire insurance.
Now, how do we bring those organizations, how do we get them to come back into our state? Obviously,
it's not beneficial to them, and there's a whole reason behind that. That's why when you look at the not so fair plan,
right. Which we all are part of now.
Well, thank God I'm not
you,
yet. I'd rather pay more.
That's why you pay more.
Well, but I remember this as a contractor dealing with the earthquake in '94.
Right.
And so I used a company called GeoVera because nobody sells insurance. But I have earthquake insurance on my home. I pay about $2,000 a year, and it's worth every dime because I saw the impacts of not being insured for an earthquake. We live in California. It's not how, but when, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I looked at the contents of my home over a lifetime, what it would cost to replace it, code upgrade. I'm covered very well. I have move-out expenses covered. Again, that affords me the opportunity, should something happen, that I have the ability to rebuild my home and not go to FEMA and beg for money and then try and restart my life at 60 years old. I think that we need to be concerned with, we need to go back and say, okay, when you look at the amount of fires, and I know CAL FIRE would be on board for this, I know that our department would certainly be on board for it. When you look at the amount of fire, we have our share of wildfire, there's no doubt. But look at how many structures were really damaged, whether it was Fairview or the other stuff.
Correct.
And thank God that we have mutual aid, that we do have the departments and the services we have. God bless CAL FIRE and Murrieta Fire and the other departments because they moved quickly. It could have been far different. But what could they do if I gave more resources from being proactive rather than reactive?
Reactive, right.
Right, where I said, okay, guys, here's the money. What do you need to do? You're the fire experts. You tell us, not the politicians.
Right.
And then we go, here's the money we're earmarking for this. Defendable space becomes important. When you look at the one structure that we lost in Murrieta, it was due to not having a defendable space. When we looked at the structures that did have it, meaning that they had 100 feet that was cleared around the perimeter of their home, most of those homes weren't damaged. A lot of times what we have is poor access, not enough equipment, or we have multiple fires going simultaneously.
Wow.
And so that's a resource that we really need to put money into. And I think in turn, it's going to serve us better. It's going to give us the opportunity to help people with the insurance ratings. I think the insurance companies all know that what they do is they have to keep a reserve.
Sure.
And let's say Liz and Jonathan have an insurance company. We're insuring 1,200 homes. Well, we have to have X amount of dollars, 30, 40, 100 million, in some cases billions, in reserve in case something would transpire. Well, those reserves actually earn capital, right? And so when the liability exceeds their ability, I've always asked is what happens to those reserves when they walk away and decide they don't want to insure anymore?
Wow.
It's a fair question, right?
Yeah, it is. It really is.
Again, I look at when you're going to say, I'm impacted and I live in a community that's not within 150 yards of a fire hazard. Wow. I have suppression on my home, a tile roof, all these other things. I don't have anything surrounding my walls or my property lines that would impact a fire unless it came from internally, right? And so you look and go, why am I paying for the mistakes of government that went in and built these areas out and didn't look on how we were going to implement maintaining them and taking care of them?
Wow. Whew, there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, I told you, it's omnidirectional. There's a lot going on.
Wow. I do know there's some very, very good things that are happening in this region, and people like you stepping forward and making people like me aware of them, and I can start to take part. What would you invite someone like me to do in the community, to speak out, to learn more? How would we get involved?
I think to be engaged, the problem is today is when you read media, it's opinion, right? My opinion in $1 is not going to get you a cup of Starbucks, right? But what we can do is be well informed, make sure your information is accurate, and that you put it through a critical thinking process. I tell people all the time that want to be politically engaged, you have no power as an elected. What you have is a well-articulated argument with access and 3 votes. So you have to convince your colleagues that what you're doing doesn't have an agenda, that it's the right thing to do. And sometimes it's not. Like I said, the paradigm from the inside looking out is quite different from the outside looking in. And what you do is you show up to the council meetings, you show up to your chamber meetings, talk to your neighbors. I mean, one of the big problems that I see, this device right here.
It spreads all the word.
You want to create pandemonium at the holidays at your house? Shut your Wi-Fi off and watch your grandchildren and your kids lose their minds, right? So I think that's an issue where you use this for the right thing, but it's become a distraction because in this conversation alone, I've probably used 50 acronyms for government with you, DIF, TUMF, and you go, and the average person goes, well, what is that? They don't know that it's development impact fees, off-site costs. They don't know that builds their sidewalks, their infrastructure, their intersections, the other stuff. It's sitting down and getting a master plan together that makes sense and then actually implementing it. When I was on the I-15 Corridor Commission with Mayor Ron out of Temecula, we would set meetings and everybody would blame somebody else for the traffic issues that were here. And I said, so the one gentleman was very vehement, he was very annoyed, and I asked him, I said, so I got a question, where do you live? And he happened to live on the other side of Murrieta. And I said, so when you're traveling southbound down the 15 and you're going to your city, which is on the other side of Murrieta, does the traffic in Temecula and Murrieta impact you getting home? And he goes, well, of course. And I go, then it impacts all of us. And as the county's growing out now, we need to start being regional thinkers. We need to sit and figure out how we're going to solve problems and help our sister cities and the county.
That's huge. That's huge.
But it's going to take constituents. It's going to take business owners. It's more, and it's. I don't think it's that daunting of a task, quite frankly. I just think that you be transparent, be honest. I think politics has gone in a bunch of different directions simultaneously, and it needs to focus on why do you elect somebody? Why do you put them in office? And I would certainly think any way I voted should be up for a challenge, and I should be willing to respond and defend that position, not take it personal. I can agree to disagree with you without hating you.
Absolutely.
This intolerant anger of people, again, what you do in your personal life, your business. Just don't make your business mine.
Absolutely.
Don't have a negative impact on my family, my environment, and we're going to get along just fine.
Just fine. Absolutely.
Right?
That's awesome. Well, we've covered a lot of bases here today.
We did.
Oh my gosh. If you had to give one closing of, let's say, where you think your focus is going to go into the community in the next 12 months, where would you say that will be?
Certainly, again, I have the opportunity to fly at a 30,000-foot level, and I get pretty intense at what I do and what I study, so I spend a lot of time reading, watching. I've had the opportunity to be, it's partisan, but the Republican Party chairman for the county, served in a lot of different capacities over a decade and a half in the county politically, so I have an opportunity and speak to a lot of people on a daily basis to understand what's happening, what's transpiring. And my hopes is that having conversations like this, having podcasts, again, when we have an issue, come back and have that conversation, that we have that opportunity and that we've created that door. So that's going to be my role for at least the next year and a half.
Love it.
And then we'll see. But right now, I really want to be an advocate for our seniors. I think animals are becoming more and more of an issue. As chairman of Animal Friends of the Valley, I'm a dog lover.
Oh, wow.
And so my fur babies are my second set of children.
That's the truth.
So we've got a lot to do and figure out how to engage people.
I agree. I think we're all running at 100 miles an hour, semi-engaged. I know that sometimes I act out semi-engaged, and that's a factor of busyness, that I think we all could focus on. So maybe more of fully present.
And it's hard, quite frankly, because when you look, when I grew up, that was the start of the generation where you had to have a two-income family.
Yes.
I had the mindset, I didn't care if I had to work 3 jobs and only got 2 hours sleep. I know why my children are of the ilk and quality that they are and the conviction they have, and it is 100% to do with my wife. Because I spent the vast majority of time working, although I pride myself in making sure that I taught them how to be critical thinkers.
I like that.
And I think that's important, and understanding that, you know what, unless you're walking somebody else's shoes, don't judge anyone. Judge not, for you shall be judged, right? And so I try to work that mantra every day. I feel blessed that I've had the connections that I've had with the senior community. I'm absolutely happy with most of the politicians that are in our region. Once in a while, there are a few that I'm not happy with. But that's typical. You're never going to be happy 100% of the time. We have a very, very good mayor in the city of Murrieta with Lori Stone. I think Mr. Holliday is an amazing representative, the people that I have personal relationships with. So I think Murrieta has got great things in the future. And I think Temecula as well as Elsinore. I think we're in Menifee it's growing into an amazing city, and it's not going to go away. And so if people are annoyed, with car washes and apartment buildings, get engaged. Show up to a council meeting. Show up to a planning commission meeting, and have the conversation. Say, this is what we want to see. The more of you that you can attend there, the better it's going to be. And if I can be an advocate and be the town crier on that, so be it. I'll take that title.
I love it. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for being here today, giving us insight into our local and statewide government, that there's so much that needs to be revealed to all of us. And that is the start of making a difference. So thank you for taking the time to do that.
Get out and vote.
Absolutely.
Your vote does count.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone, for attending. I appreciate you being here.
We filled that bucket up, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Thank you for listening to Local Living Tri-City. Stay tuned for more insights and stories from Temecula, Murrieta, Menifee, and surrounding areas. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend that is passionate about the Tri-City area as you are. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you next episode.